Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first of our 2021-2022 Lunch and Learn programs. I'm Robin Schmidt, President of the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area. And while we had hoped that we would be able to have in-person programs this fall, we recognize that we're just not there yet. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us electronically. We're sorry that you have to bring your own lunch, and we look forward to once again when we can see each other in 3D. We're excited to bring to you a panel of experts on the La Crosse County Criminal Justice Management System and members of the Criminal Justice Management Council. The council is charged with evaluating the La Crosse County criminal justice system and reviewing and making recommendations to the La Crosse County board and committees to ensure policies and programs reflect the La Crosse County correctional philosophy. But before we get started, we do have just a few business items to go over first with you. Our Lunch and Learn programs are just one way to stay engaged in our community, and we encourage you to check out our website for more opportunities to stay connected. The calendar on our webpage includes both league and community events that you might be interested in, and our Ways to Engage webpage offers even more opportunities to stay connected. I think one of the most important services that our league provides is nurturing a feeling of community and connectivity among members. Discussion groups, book club, and our newly reinstated Observer Corps are just some ways that you can keep up on what's happening in the greater La Crosse area. New this year to our traditional Lunch and Learn program will be the opportunity to participate in a follow-up discussion group that gives you a chance to engage more interactively and have more conversation and dive deeper into the topics presented at our Lunch and Learn programs. We'll gauge your interest in this through a very short poll that you will see on your screen at the end of the presentation today. After this webinar, if there's enough interest in a particular topic, we'll try to arrange an evening Zoom meeting in the next few weeks where we can continue this discussion in more detail. Since this is a new concept, please bear with us. It may or may not be a success, but we want to at least try to see if it helps meet members' needs. Last year, Ellen Franz provided us with a brief legal update at the start of our Lunch and Learn programs, and I'm grateful that she's willing to do that again this year. I also want to thank Mary Nugent, our past president, and now our program committee chair, for all she's done to organize our Lunch and Learn programs and to help with all the logistics. As always, this webinar will be recorded and available on our website and on our YouTube channel. If you have questions for Ellen or our panelists, please type them into the question box located at the bottom of your screen. Mary will be monitoring the question box, and after the panelists have concluded, we'll allow some time for her to ask questions. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We are political, but we do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. So now, to keep us up to date on what the courts have been doing, let's introduce Ellen Franz.
Good day. So just a couple of areas. You probably have seen that there are already 3 cases pending on the redistricting issue, even though we have no maps yet. There are 2 in federal court, one brought by a Democratic attorney in favor of some plaintiffs, Democratic voters, and a second one that was brought by a voting advocacy group, both in federal district court. Those will likely be consolidated. And you may have seen in the news that Governor Evers has asked to be able to join the lawsuit, and the Republican Party has also, or Republicans legislature, excuse me, has also asked to join. Basically, the ask is that that the court, federal court, not allow the legislature to consider the 2011 maps and proceed to, redo their own. Both sides see the necessity likely for the court to resolve the issue because we have a Republican majority in our legislature, Democratic governor, and there's probably going to be no agreement anywhere. There also is a case that was filed in the Wisconsin Supreme Court that's brought by conservatives and just basically asking the court to go ahead and take the case. You may remember that in the past, the Supreme Court was asked early by petition to take the case early and handle it here in the state of Wisconsin. They declined to take it at that time. We don't know what they're going to do this time around. And if they take it, they may say, okay, but we want a trial court, state trial court, to do a fact finding for us. But those are the things that are pending on redistricting. And then I'll just quickly mention that you're also probably reading in the media about the continued investigation into the 11/20 election. So we have Vos and his committee or group that's headed by former Supreme Court Justice Gableman, who is seeking information, asking clerks to make sure, municipal clerks across the state, to make sure they hang on to things. Not much has happened except the information about the $680,000 contracts for other contractors with his group. We also have State Representative Janet Broadgen, who keeps asking for a more forensic audit. She issued some subpoenas that were not valid. And so those two things are also in the work, examining what, of course, some people have called the big steal. So we'll see how that all rolls out. But that's all for an update. If anybody has any questions?
Ellen, I don't see any right now.
Okay. Well, then we're going to move on and introduce the panel. So I'll start with Tim Gruenke, who is the district attorney in La Crosse County. He has been a district attorney for the last 14 years, and he's the current chair of the Criminal Justice Management Council. The Honorable Scott Horne is a graduate of UW Law School. He was district attorney from 1985 to 2007. He was elected judge for the first time in 2007 and is still one of our La Crosse County Circuit judges. He also at this time is serving as the deputy chief judge for the 7th District. Then we have Margaret Larson. Margaret has been on the commission from 2004 to 2008 as a citizen member representing a mental health perspective, during which time she also facilitated mental health crisis intervention training for law enforcement. In 2016, she was elected to the La Crosse County Board representing District 14 and was also appointed to serve on the Criminal Justice Management Council. She is chair of the Judiciary and Law Committee and has been a League of Women Voters member since 1975. And finally, we have Dr. Suthakaran, who is an assistant professor at UW La Crosse in the psychology department, where he teaches courses in counseling related to addressing the roles of culture and race. The focus of his scholarship is in the area of racial and religious identity development, where he explores the impact of experiential processing in identity development. I'm going to extend a big welcome to our 4 panelists this morning. Thank you very much for agreeing to be here with us.
And thank you, Ellen, for that great introduction. What you see on your screen now are the 2 questions that the panelists are going to respond to. The first question is, from your perspective, what are the greatest successes of the criminal justice management system in La Crosse in the past 10 years? as they relate to diversions, equity, inclusion, and diversity. And each panelist will have 5 minutes to provide us with their perspective. And then the second question they'll be asked are, what should the criminal justice management system look like in the next 10 years as it relates to diversions, equity, inclusion, and diversion? And we're going to do this in alphabet. The first question will be alphabetical order going from A to Z, and the second question will be in reverse alphabetical order, just so that we have not putting the same people on the spot at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share of the question. And then the first question will go to Mr. Gruenke. If you would like to provide us your perspective on the first question, that would be excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for having us. As I was thinking about this question, I think what I've come to conclude is that we've had a success in not just doing like one thing or one program or one act. It's been a process. We've been talking about disproportionate minority contacts in the system for as long as I've been a prosecutor. And I think for many, many years, we were just kind of stuck on saying, we've got a problem. There's too many people of color coming into the system. And the easiest place to get numbers was a police department. So we could say the police are arresting this many people and that's disproportionate to the population. But we really didn't know why. And about all we would do is try to work on those numbers of police arrests and figure out a way to try to get those numbers to look better. I'd say in the last 5 years, but maybe especially in the last 3, we've kind of changed our way of looking at this. I think the police certainly are a group that need to be aware of this topic and need, help in this topic, but they're not alone. And I think they get a little bit scapegoated because they're easy to get numbers and they're easy to kind of see what they're doing. But as a community and as a system, I think we looked at them as the bad ones. They're the ones causing the problem. We're arresting too many people. People are getting pulled over for their color, and we've got to figure out a way to stop that. But I think instead of looking at the criminal justice system as a window between the community and the system, I think we started looking at it more as a mirror, that the police are a reflection of what the community wants. It's the one place where the government, represented by the police, are interacting with the citizens, and whatever conflicts there are in society, it really comes out, and it's on video and it's public and it's a direct contact, where most other times it's a little more hidden. And I've said before that, the police, while they certainly can improve, they come from the same schools, communities, churches we all go to. And I think there's a tendency for most of us to say those people in the system are, doing bad because there's a, racial disproportionate numbers, without realizing we're reacting to who the police are called for, who calls the police. We're responding to the inequities in poverty and mental health and other systems, and it kind of all is visible in our system, but it's really a mirror. The police weren't transplanted here from some other planet. They grew up same places, they went to the same schools, they believe the same things and watch the same things on TV as we all do. So I think we shifted to say we're all in this together. The entire community has to change if our system is going to change. The system can't just right the ship by itself. So a couple of years ago, the Criminal Justice Management Council spent a whole year on this topic, which had never been done before. We usually had maybe a speaker, maybe one session on it, and we thought, well, we did something, so we're doing good. But I think we learned through that year, where we talked about racial identity and the disproportionate numbers, and looked at ourselves. I think a lot of us opened our eyes to say we really need to change who we all are as a group, as a community, and not just kind of blame other people for the problem and consider ourselves the good ones. So we spent a whole year on this topic. And since then, I think the success that I've seen is that the entire council now believes that this is an issue, believes it's something we need to work on, believes that we're going in the right direction, believes we've made more progress in the last couple of years than we did in many years before, because we're finally looking at it as we've got to change how we think and how we act and how we all interact with each other and not just trying to fix numbers and try to, you know, make ourselves look good by changing the outcomes in terms of numbers. We've got to actually change our system and change ourselves and change what we're doing. So for me, that's been the biggest change, and I think the biggest success. I think that is going to continue in being able to then, as we make policies and we make changes, we consider this. We're not just doing window dressing. We're not just putting a Band-Aid on something. We're actually trying to change how the people in the system see people of color. And that's been the biggest changes I've seen.
Thank you very much. Judge Horne, would you like to respond to that question about what you see the greatest successes of the criminal justice management system in the last 10 years? Thank you. You'll need to unmute yourself, Judge.
I'm understanding the question also to refer to what are called diversions. So I'll comment certainly on the diversity question that Tim has responded to, but also take a little longer perspective, so to speak. I began in the criminal justice system in La Crosse in 1979, so I'm dating myself a little bit in that statement. I started in the DA's office in 1981, district attorney in 84, and then, as Ellen mentioned, have been on the bench since 2007. And the governor made an excellent hire, and Tim is my replacement in the DA role. When I interviewed with then district attorney Mike Mulroy, now retired judge, back in 1980 or 81, he had indicated, you'll try a lot of cases, nothing all that serious. And I remember the biggest drug cases at that point were probably a pound of ditchweed marijuana. We were just becoming aware of domestic violence and how to approach that. Victim rights was something that we didn't talk a whole lot about. Overdose deaths were something that we simply had no reason to be all that concerned about. When it came to pretrial release, the judge's options were cash bond or signature bond. There was very little in the way of bail monitoring, and decisions were made really on the basis of the gravity of the crime and gut instincts, and nothing more. We've come a long way since 1979. With respect to specifically diversions, which was one of the topics referenced, as DA, we began looking at the way we were doing business and concluded that there was probably a more effective way of handling certain misdemeanor offenses and low-level felony offenders. In the past, individuals had pled guilty to a criminal offense, or we sought conviction at trial. If convicted, typically they would go on probation. There were a lot of resources that were used, not necessarily all that effective. Research demonstrated for low-level, low-risk offenders, if we put them in an environment where they're having contact with a lot of higher-risk individuals, more criminally oriented individuals, that the results aren't going to be real great. I think any parent knows that if your son or daughter hangs out with bad people, bad things are going to happen. And unknowingly, we were doing a lot of that in the criminal justice system by placing low-risk offenders in constant contact with higher-risk individuals through the sentencing process. So we became much more aware of the consequences through research, and we've made a commitment to engage in evidence-based practices. Diversion agreements are one. An individual pleads guilty to a charge rather than being sentenced, placed on probation. They're given an opportunity to meet certain conditions, and if successful, have the charge dismissed rather than a lasting criminal history. In terms of diversity, I think we've come a long way, and I have learned a lot just by participating in many of the trainings that have taken place in listening to other people and their experience. There's no question that research has shown that a disproportionate number of minority individuals have been incarcerated at a much higher rate than others. I think that's the statistic that has really gathered everyone's attention. The question that we're now confronting is, why does that happen? That certainly fostered a fair amount of research. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. The Chief Justice had asked one of the statisticians in the state court's office to do an analysis and concluded that judges were not discriminating overtly against minority population, but certainly the impact of what we were doing had a disproportionate impact. And I think as we look forward over the next 10 years, and I'll talk about this in a few moments, it's going to be important for us to understand the reasons that that's occurring, and then really try to develop some evidence-based approaches to doing business in a better way, a way that brings everybody to the table. We have this romantic vision of the United States as being a country in which we're the great melting pot. People from all sorts of backgrounds, nationalities come together and somehow are able to be blended into this effective, welcoming, opportunity-based community. I think the United States is a wonderful country, but obviously we have some challenges, and I know we're going to be up to confronting those challenges.
Thank you very much, Judge. Next is Supervisor Margaret Larson. Margaret, would you like to give us your perspective on what some of the successes are in the last 10 years as they relate to diversions, equity, inclusion, and diversity? And also make sure you unmute yourself.
All right, here we are. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. The three others on this panel are people that I've learned to appreciate a great deal in the time that I've spent in meetings with them in the Criminal Justice Management Council. So we are very lucky to have them so involved in and so interested in what we're talking about today. I'm going to start at the bottom of the bullet points and transparency. And that is that one of the gifts, perhaps the only gift of COVID-19, is remote meetings. Because generally when the Criminal Justice Management Council would meet, we might have 2 or 3 people observing. Now that we've been meeting remotely, there could be 10 to 30 people beyond the council members that are checking in, listening in, sometimes commenting. And actually that's been one of the goals of the council, is to get more information out to the public. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's the first thing that came to mind for me. When it comes to equity and inclusion, I'm going to leave most of that to Sutha, because that's really his strong point. But in terms of accomplishments in the last 10 years, sometimes it's not so much the council is accomplishing things as it is that the members of the council, the citizen representatives, the health department, the human services department of the county, collaborating with one another. And one of those examples is the System of Care, which was a program that started about 5 years ago. And it gets the human services and schools and the police department working together to try to do some early intervention so that kids don't get to a point where they tend to be lost to the system. I wanted to acknowledge what Tim said about the racial and gender disparities in the criminal justice system. I think the most important turning point was those studies that were done and presented to the council, and the fact that the council members acknowledge this is a local issue. It's not national except for La Crosse, it is us. And so with that knowledge, we move forward with more criminal justice reform, as well as trying to make ourselves more open to, I guess I would say what we often consider the other, which then leads to the efforts to have representation on the council of people of color. And by virtue of positions that are on the council, it's vast majority white. The sheriff, the DA, the health and human services director, and so on. But there's been an attempt to recruit. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to retain. And so that's something, I guess, for the next question. But another good thing that's come out of this is the police department, the La Crosse Police Department, now when responding to a 911 emergency crisis call, a county crisis responder goes with the police officer as a way to help calm down the person and make it a better result. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And the last of our panelists to respond to the question about their view of successes in the last 10 years is Sutha. Please go ahead and give your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this opportunity. And I feel honored to be part of this panel. The three folks on this panel, I truly respect them. And actually, Tim and I feel like we've become very good friends. And actually, he has set me up really nice for what I have to say. So what I've noticed is I like to use analogies to convey what I have to say. So I'm going to fall back on one of my analogies. So I'm going to be talking about squirrels and elephants. So please humor me. So when you look at, it's not just a community like the La Crosse community. You can look at any community in the United States. These communities were, if you want to think of a zoo, yes, an elephant's cage in a zoo, yes, right? The elephant cage was set up for elephants. Yes, and in this case, what I'm talking about is an analogy. The elephant cage was set up by elephants for elephants. And so when a group of squirrels join these elephants in this cage, you can expect, squirrels to have difficulties, yes, that the elephants might not be aware of. Okay. So when I'm asked this question, well, Sudha, what do you think about the successes that we have had? Then I have to ask, well, who is defining the term success? Is it the elephants or the squirrels? What might seem like a success to elephants, might just be totally irrelevant to squirrels. So let me give you examples. Yes, just to make it more concrete. Yes. So this is from the Tribune, September 8th, 2021. La Crosse County Executive Committee passes resolution welcoming Afghan refugees to region. I mean, if I am an elephant, I'm really proud. Am I not? I'm looking at this. Yes, I'm really proud. And then when I read further, this is what it says. the resolution is essentially a commitment by the county and doesn't make any policy or financial changes. Okay. Okay. What does that mean now? Okay. So this is being done for whom? Let me share another one. Yes. So this is from April 20th. La Crosse County Board declares racism a public health crisis. Wonderful. Yes. And it was passed nearly unanimously with just one abstention. Again, I'm saying wonderful. And if you had UWL, the same thing is kind of happening. Yes, the chancellor just announced they are going to rename, yes, 2 buildings. Yes, I can actually tell you what they are. 2 buildings. Let me just take a quick look. The Student Union and the Center for the Arts, yes, they're going to rename them to honor, yes, outstanding alumni of color from UWL. Again, if you're an elephant, you're thinking, wonderful. Okay, so please stay with the analogy, okay? Please stay with the analogy. So if this cage was built by elephants for elephants, now you might not be surprised to see a water fountain that is 10 feet tall, yes? Because a 10 feet tall water fountain works great for elephants. Now, if you're a squirrel, it doesn't work so great, does it? Now, you see, as an elephant, it might not occur to you that this is a problem for squirrels. And so when squirrels make noise about the water fountain, well, there's only one thing to do, yes? But instead, what you choose to do is you rename the water fountain, yes, you give it a name, yes, in honor of a squirrel, a distinguished squirrel. You see, do you see, I'm glad some of you are laughing. This is, yes, it's ludicrous, yes? It's not just ridiculous, it's ludicrous. You see, this is the absurdity of it. And so, talking about success, you see, I see a schism. Yes, there is a schism between, I think, where we are as a country, not just as a county, as a country, there's an awareness. Yes, there's an awareness of squirrels and their needs. Just because there is an awareness of squirrels and their needs, that their needs might be different from elephants, that does not mean anything has changed. See, so in terms of success, in terms of what has really changed to benefit the squirrels, I can't speak for that, see. But what has changed in terms of making the elephants really good? Oh boy, quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insights, but lucky for you, you now have the opportunity to be the first speaker to answer the second question, which is, what should the criminal justice management system look like in the next 10 years as it relates to diversions, equity, inclusion, and diversity?
Okay. Well, now, first and foremost, see, these are difficult topics to talk about. Now, I've been in this country for more than, it's going to be 35 years now. I've lived all over the country, you know, and I spent quite a bit of time in the East Coast, in Maryland, in New York, 12 years actually. There is a certain culture in the Midwest, you know, that I think all of you know what I'm talking about, is the Midwest Nights. Yes. And in wanting to talk about these difficult topics, I feel like that constantly gets in the way. There is this sense that we all have to be nice to each other all the time. And what does that mean? Even when talking about difficult topics like this, well, we can't make each other uncomfortable. That needs to be the number one priority. And so this is part of the frustration I often experience. You know, even in my psychology department, I'm talking about a psychology, you see, it's the same thing, you see, right? That this need to be nice. So when there is need to be nice everywhere, not make each other uncomfortable, somehow it's seen as improper to make other people uncomfortable. Then how are we going to address issues like law and order, right? Whenever I see, right, when a young politician wants to run for office, the easiest thing, right, for them to get attention is, well, throw out law and order. See, we all know, see, if we are being honest, that stands for something. That's a code for something. Yes. It essentially says, I am going to keep you, a white person, safe, protected from you know who. It's the same thing with the blue thin line. I mean, can we be honest? It's a blue thin line, yes, made up by law enforcement. So this blue thin line is separating whom from whom. Okay, can we be honest? Right? So there is this, see, it has always been part of this culture, part of this country, yes? And you see, we have to talk about concepts, terms, yes? We have to address white supremacy, what that means, what does that look like, okay? So in a community like La Crosse, you see, I hear people saying, right, La Crosse is a wonderful community, we love it, yes? So there is this attitude, we need to keep the big bad world out there. We don't want the big bad world out there, yes? And the big bad world, it seems like a lot of people in La Crosse is Chicago, right? And when people think about the big bad world, yes, it's people from Chicago. Well, Black people, African Americans, especially Black men. Okay, we can't keep them out, right? Okay, we can't keep, but once they get into the community, we are going to make sure the law enforcement is there to keep us protected from the big bad world. And so it has been the case, yes, for decades, for maybe centuries, yes, that the white community has given permission to law enforcement, okay? And this is what Tim was trying to address. You see, it's so easy to scapegoat the law enforcement folks right now, but then all this while we have been giving them permission, law enforcement, the permission to do whatever it takes, do whatever you do, you have to do, boys, our boys in blue, do whatever you need to do to keep us, white people, safe from the big bad world. Can we talk about this? See. So if we truly want change in the criminal justice system, these are the issues that we need to address. They all mean something. Okay. So there has to be a change in the consciousness of how we perceive criminal justice, yes, the criminal justice system, and what it really stands for, yes. Why has it taken the shape it has, you see? And talking about tall water fountains and trying to make the water fountains, yes, usable for squirrels. Here we are, the Criminal Justice Management Council. We are trying to set up an exploratory committee, yes, exploratory committee to see if there is a need for an oversight committee. Now, ask me, yes, well, you can ask any of the folks from CJMC, have we gotten anywhere? You see, now, why is that? But you see, we were so quick, yes? La Crosse County Board declares racism a public health crisis, almost unanimously. See, we are quick to do that because that, you see, we don't have to lower the water fountain. It doesn't hurt us, see? But the moment we know we are being asked to do something that somehow, yes, is going to inconvenience us, we're going to lose some of our privilege, you see a big period. See, right? And so I, as a squirrel, yes, people of color as a squirrel, yes, we are very attentive. We have to be, see, right? Put yourself, yes, make yourself a squirrel. We as a squirrel, we have to be very attentive in the elephant's cage. Yes, we have to pay attention to survive or we'll get squashed. Okay. But then we are treated like, we have no clue what is going on. So, we are often condescended to, see, which is just not just frustrating. It's yes, it makes one angry. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Supervisor Larson, you would be next then. Would you like to provide your insights into what you think success would be like for the next 10 years?
You want me to follow Sutha?
Sorry.
Yes, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy the monthly meetings of the Criminal Justice Management Council, because he's always challenging us, he's challenging me, and that's why I think what's really important is that we get outside our white bubbles, that we get to know people who aren't just like us. And one of the problems that we're dealing with now that I hope we can overcome, Sutha mentioned that, and that was the Citizen Advisory Council or Board to be looking over law enforcement in terms of racial justice. And you may all be aware of this, but so I was looking at the list of topics that we were going to be following through our monthly meetings in 2021. And all of that just blew up in the middle of the year last summer. And that was the response to George Floyd's murder. So we let the rest of the agenda go out the window, and we started focusing on what is it that we need to be doing now. And that we came up with 3 subcommittees. One was to look at the school resource officers we have in the middle schools and high schools here. One was to look at police training. And the third one was whether or not an advisory council would be useful in terms of attaining equity. And that turned into the very hot subcommittee that resulted in resignations of essential people from the Criminal Justice Management Council due to harassment by certain police officers. And we're still reeling from that. And what it's going to take is building trust between law enforcement and between the people that are arrested far too often for things that white people are not, or the people who are sentenced for so much more than people who are white are not. And what I think it takes, well, and this was alluded to, is that we do focus on police about this, but we really do need to be focusing on all of us. And that's where our relationships come in. So Robin, if you could put up that photo for me, thank you. I want all of you to meet Andy and Javi. Javi is 5. He is the son of my niece, Mary, who is of Scandinavian descent. His father is a Mexican-American, a US citizen born in this country. And when people ask him, where are you from? He'll say, here. And they say, well, wait a minute, but where are you from? And he says, here, I was born in the United States. Anyway, that's Javi. And he's very dear to me. He's the only one of his generation in my immediate family. With Javi is his big cousin, Andy. Andy's mother and Javi's father are siblings. And you can tell by Andy's skin tone that his father is of African-American descent. And I carry this photo with me so that when people start talking about things in a way that I think they shouldn't, I can pull it out and say, I want you to meet 2 people that are very important to me. And every time I look at this photo, the question that comes to my mind is, how old will they and every other African-American man-child be when they die? And, you know, I never ask that question or have that thought cross my mind when I look at my fair-skinned sons. That's why all of this is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'm glad I was able to get the technology working to share that photo. Next will be Judge Horne, if you would like to address what you see success for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the different perspectives on this panel. And Margaret, that's certainly a very moving portrait and reflection. I could listen to Sutha talk forever because he has kind of a unique way of putting things in perspective and challenging us all, which I think we all need. And Tim obviously has done a wonderful job of leading the Criminal Justice Management Council. So I want to thank everyone. I had kind of a unique experience a few years ago that gave me an appreciation for some of the perspectives that Sutha brings. My son was working in New York. He had an apartment in Harlem. And so I went out to visit him in New York, and he was showing me around his apartment in the neighborhood. And a woman came out and kind of looked us up and down, and said to us, not in any kind of mean tone, so what are you boys doing in Harlem? These two Caucasian fellows with their golf polo shirts walking the street. And like I said, it wasn't a mean-spirited comment, but it was a statement or feeling on our part that we're free to walk the streets, but we really don't belong here. And I think what Sutha has conveyed in many respects is a feeling that many people have. They're free to go about the community, but there's a feeling or perception of lack of belonging. And that's something obviously that needs to change, because we're all a single community. People need to feel as if they belong, that they have a seat at the table, that they're appreciated. I had referred to the Chief Justice's study. There was research that demonstrated that minority populations are 20% more likely to be incarcerated in relation to population than white individuals. The length of the sentence doesn't necessarily vary, but the likelihood of incarceration is much greater. Joe Donnell, who is an African-American judge in Milwaukee, had an interesting perspective. We've done a lot of research recently on ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And his perspective was that research shows a correlation between adverse childhood experiences and crime, and individuals in certain communities are more likely to suffer adverse childhood experiences. This has an impact. We I think rightfully are proud of the fact that we are relying on objective tools to assist us in making decisions. But we also need to recognize that many of those tools refer back to areas or qualities in which minority population may not score so well. Adverse childhood experiences include violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide, experience with substance abuse problems, mental health problems, instability due to parental separation, household members being in jail or prison. And if that's the environment that you grow up in, there's a higher likelihood of involvement in the criminal justice system, and also showing the instability that many times can be reflected in the results of the risk assessment tools that we use. what I'm seeing is that we are in a position now as a community where we're beginning to recognize disproportionate impacts in our system. We're beginning to ask the question, why is this taking place? And what I see us doing over the next 10 years is coming to a conclusion about the why, and hopefully being in a position where we can address some of those whys. Judge Donnell's perspective is that adverse childhood experiences are really important. And if that's true, then that puts a burden on us as a community to address some of the experiences that children are suffering that cause some of the effects that we're seeing at a later point in life. But what I see us doing over the next 10 years is really coming to a conclusion about why, and then trying to address that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gruenke, how about your thoughts as our last speaker? And we really appreciate everything everyone has said.
Okay, unlike other people, I have a bit of a problem with Sutha's analogy. As an elephant, I've told him repeatedly that as someone who's trying to shed a few pounds, could we pick a different animal to represent, like a giraffe, an antelope? I mean, I feel like he's taking a swipe at me every time he tells that story. But as far as where we're going in the next 10 years is, I think we are in the middle right now of a really big change in our society, and where we go, we'll see. But I think a lot of places around the country have opened their eyes to looking at crime just in a different way. And there are DAs around the country that have tried to look at prosecuting crimes in a different way. The traditional way we've done it forever is you have to arrest people who break the law, you have to punish them, and punishment means jail or prison, and that should fix the problem, but we know it doesn't. So I think we're in the middle of looking at things like La Crosse has always been progressive in terms of drug court, OWI court, to try to look at how we treat people differently to give a better chance for our outcomes. We have diversion agreements, pre-charge diversion agreements. We use risk assessments, as Judge Horne mentioned. We do a lot of things here that we're trying to look at things differently. And I think after George Floyd's murder last year and all the kind of national examinations of our justice system, I think now is a good time to kind of push the pedal down a little bit farther and go a little bit faster. Mental health, for example, we all know that there's people in jail that have mental illness that don't belong there, but the question is, what else do we have? Can we do something more in the county or in the hospital system or the health system to take care of people's mental health instead of relying on police and relying on jails? Drug addiction is another one. The war on drugs has been going on forever, and we know that doesn't really change people's addiction. So can we do more as a system instead of arresting people, prosecuting them? Can we make it more of a health medical issue? And there are these conversations happening and there are changes occurring, but the system is really set in stone and it takes a long time to change things. You've got different local politics, state politics, federal politics, you've got different budgets, you've got different agencies. And so change is really hard, but I think we're right in the middle of it right now. Hopefully we come out of this in another 10 years looking like we've actually changed the system. And as Sutha mentioned, not just talking about it and making resolutions, but actually structural changes to, we're not arresting people that don't need to be arrested. We're taking people to the hospital or social workers or psychologists instead of to the judges. And our communities will be better because of it. Judge Horne talked about trauma to children. And in many ways, the criminal justice system sometimes makes things worse. When you talk about like domestic violence, we address it with arresting, prosecution, jail, instead of working with psychologists, social workers to help the family get through what they're going through. So I think we're right in the middle of it right now. And I think there's a lot of wind beneath our sail right now. Hopefully it continues. But what stands in the way is all the people that aren't here listening to us. There's a large percentage of our community and of the United States that don't want to sit and talk about these things. They don't want to talk about white identity. You've heard police chiefs say there's no racism in our departments and just kind of ignoring it. And my struggle is always, how do you reach those people and persuade those people that don't want to hear from the people that are speaking here? They don't want to talk about this because it's a pretty substantial number of people that are still kind of not wanting to move forward and stay where they're at. And to me, that's always been the biggest challenge, is trying to work with those people that are still members of our community that have very different views from those of us that might want to make things different. But the next 10 years, I see us continuing the discussion we're having about race, but also mental health, drug addiction, and even how we treat crime in general, how our entire model of policing needs to be changed. And you're seeing it in different parts around the country, and hopefully that continues, and hopefully we do it right.
Oh, muted, Robin.
Thank you. I'd like to pause for just a minute and see if we can do one more feat of technology, and that is to ask a poll question to our audience relating to a topic that they might want to have some follow-up discussion on. So I think our audience should be able to see this poll. If you could click on a response, and again, this is new, I'm not 100% sure people are going to be able to do this, but we're going to try it. So hopefully people will be able to see it and provide an answer. If you're interested in having an evening small group discussion on a particular topic, please indicate that, and I'll just let this run for another minute or two so that folks have an opportunity, since it is new. And I do see that people are answering this, so we'll just let this run for another minute. Meanwhile, if folks do want to consider their questions and put them into the question box at the bottom of their screen, that would be really helpful. We do have time for questions. I know I've got one of my own that I haven't had time to type in yet, but hopefully Mary will give me an opportunity to ask that as well. So we'll just wait another 30 seconds for this. And I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. It looks like most of the respondents have submitted their response here. And yay, that technology seemed to work. Mary, can I turn it over to you to ask questions, or would it be okay for me to start with the first question? All right. So, so my question to the each of the guests here has to do. I know that we talked about, and I really appreciated the information on the criteria, the reviews, the way that you do risk assessments. I have an environmental background working on remediation of contaminated properties throughout the state. And one of the concerns I have are the exposure that people who tend to live in more impoverished communities have to things like lead and other dangerous chemicals that really affect their ability to make decisions, especially as they're youth and as they're maturing into adults. And I'm curious as to whether or not those kinds of questions are ever looked at in the criminal justice system.
I guess I would say the broader social questions probably are not. In terms of the criminal justice system and the court system, we're really litigating individual cases. We're looking at what's happened. We're looking at the reasons for it. At sentencing, when we focus on potential for rehabilitation, identifying needs, those are not questions that typically come up. I think in the broader perspective, however, in a broader community perspective, when we talk about community approaches and factors that might have a bearing on young people, and identifying barriers and then trying to eliminate those barriers. I think those are really important questions.
Would anyone else like to respond? No? Okay. Thank you. Here's a question. Is anything being done to address the cultural differences people of color present and the needs they have that often result in charges being brought against them? The needs being mental health, poverty, and lack of education, to name a few.
I guess I'll take a poke at that. You know, when you say, is anything being done, you know, on a level of like our training, you know, the DA's office, I know public defenders, judges. As I said before, we've done a lot more in the last couple of years than we did in many years before that to learn about cultural competencies and to try to understand where people are coming from and try to respond appropriately given, you know, who they are and what disadvantages they might have. We're also trying to do, as I mentioned, right now, the current topic we're talking about in the Criminal Justice Management Council is mental health, and trying to figure out how we can steer more people with mental health into a hospital system or human services system instead of the jail system. You know, it's a challenging topic, but I think we do consider those things in terms of how can we address those problems, because those problems are what lead to many times the police being called and then criminal problems. And the police will tell you too, it's not like they like arresting everybody, but sometimes there's just nothing else to do. A person having mental health crisis who's causing issues, you know, hospitals can't take them, county can't take them. They got to go somewhere, and a lot of times that ends up being jail, not because we think they belong there, but just we've got to do something that's like our last resort. So I think everybody in the system agrees we should try to figure out a better way to do it. Exactly where we end up, though, is yet to be seen.
Okay, would anyone else like to respond to that? Thank you, Tim. All right, here's another question. Whatever happened to the concept of jail as rehabilitation instead of punishment? No one
Judge Horne, you want to take that one?
You know, I think in the criminal justice system, obviously in sentencing, we're looking at the individual. We're trying to look at rehabilitative needs. We have an array of risk and needs evaluations that we can utilize. So if there are treatment needs, whether it be in the area of domestic violence, alcohol or drug abuse, mental health, assuming that we have the resources, and that's a big assumption, that are appropriate to that individual, then obviously that's a significant component at any sentencing. I think most individuals recognize as well that an elemental sense of justice requires that there be some accountability, that if a wrong has been done that arises to the level of a criminal charge and conviction, then there needs to be some sort of accountability for that. Typically, we have an array of options that can include fine, community service, or jail. Those are the standard options. We have done much more, although I think we've got a long way to go in terms of accountability to victims. The concept of restorative justice, putting a victim in a stronger position afterwards through accountability on the part of the offender, is something that's important. with respect to jails specifically, there's been a fair amount of research that's been done that demonstrates that if you put low-risk offenders in the middle of a population with higher risk offenders, they are not typically going to make the higher risk individuals better. The greater likelihood is that they will come out worse. And I think I referred earlier to any parent having kind of an innate understanding of this. We all look out for our children. We look out for who are they hanging with, and recognize that if they're hanging with bad people, then we want to put a stop to that. And the same thing is true in terms of how we manage people in the criminal justice system. If you have individuals with very little in the way of criminal history, and you put them in the middle of more hardened criminals, bad things typically are going to happen. I think there are people who accept the fact that they've messed up, and a higher degree of punishment is necessary. I'm always heartened when I see people that I've sent to prison, and I may see them 3 or 4 years later, and they come back and say, I needed that. I don't think everyone needs that. I think there are some who need that. And if people go to prison with the understanding that they've done something wrong that warrants that level of punishment, then they're able to focus on doing positive things, taking advantage of opportunities in the prison system. There are some people who simply need to be incarcerated as a way of protecting the community. So I think in essence, what we need to do is look at the individual and tailor the response to the individual's history, their needs, the community's needs, and the victim's needs. And it's a tough balancing act. There are a lot of interests that need to be juggled and balanced in making those decisions. And you try to do the best you can for each individual involved.
Thank you. Margaret, did you have a comment? Could you?
I do, and I'll take my hand down. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about diversions and the justice support services that was implemented starting in 1995. Because if you look back a little bit to jail populations, in 1965, there were like 15 to 20 inmates per day. It's hard to think that there were so few. Isn't that right, Judge and Tim? Yeah.
Hey, I wasn't around in 1965, Margaret. I have no
Oh,
idea.
you weren't? Oh, sorry.
I think I was in middle school.
And in 1992, so about 30 years later, there were usually 160 inmates per day. But then a consultant that same year predicted that there would be 400 per day. And so by 2010, and we would need a jail large enough to do that. But that's when the Sentencing Strategies Committee got started, looking at smaller jails, smart alternatives and programming. And then Justice Sanctions started in 95 to implement the ideas that came out of that committee. And let's see. In 2015, this is the latest number I have, the average daily population of the jail was 192. So it didn't grow to 400. And one of the main reasons it did not grow to 400 is that the average daily population of justice support services was 230. If all of those people had been in jail, we would have been well over 400. But the institution of the services that allow for electronic monitoring and on and on and on, I can't even think of all of them, I think have made a difference in that. And then the programming that's available in the jail, there's a full-time position, a person who handles all that programming. And probably the most important part of it, these are really elective courses more than anything else, but it's really critical thinking. But there are Bible study groups, and there are GED groups and all of that. So in terms of rehabilitation, I think we've been moving that direction. Does that make sense?
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. All right, this one, I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to read this and then add on my thought. How can we reach out to more of our community to understand a call to the police over a minor issue can escalate? And so I guess I would like to say, how can we as a community and as a league help to promote some of the ideas that you have talked about today and overcome these biases? That's an entire college class of 4 years.
If it's a college class, then I think that's a question for the professor.
I will take it. I think you're doing that right now. It's happening right now. Yes. So this is a league of women voters. Yes. They're going to take what they hear, what they see, hopefully to their sons. Yes. To their husbands and to their children and relatives. And I think this is how it happens. And so I think the four of us, you see, we have done our part. Now it's up to you to disseminate, what has happened here, right? Kind of infect other people with what went on here. And I think essentially, we have been talking about how do we change a system. And I'm one who believes that you change the system by changing the components within a system, and the people, I'm not one of those people who believe that they kind of believe in a top down. So you change the system and then the people will, naturally follow suit. I don't think life works that way, So what we have right now, when you look at the criminal justice system, you see that's a manifestation of what is there, right? That's a manifestation of the consciousness of the people who have created the system. And so if this system is flawed, well, that essentially says something about the people who have created the system, doesn't it? See. So if you really want to fix the system, I think we have to start at a very individual, from a very individual place. You see, how am I understanding when I hear the word justice, right? When I hear the word punishment, when I hear the word rehabilitation, yes. Now that question, I saw that question earlier. What happened to the concept of jail as rehabilitation instead of punishment, right? So if there is this notion, again, this racist notion that Black people, Black men cannot be rehabilitated because they're all criminals, they're all thugs, then why even try to rehabilitate? Yes, we can just punish them, yes, and have them serve their punishment and get them out, you see. Now, is what's happening, right? This is what's happening, that that we do not pay attention to this notion of rehabilitation anymore, see? So these are the questions. This is what I was trying to point out. We have to have these difficult conversations, and it's not about having difficult conversations. That does not mean you have to be rude about it, right? Uncomfortable, yes, right? So yeah, the simple answer to your question is I think it's happening right now, right? See, we're doing it right now. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to put in just a plug for the city police department. I'm not sure how public this was, but there is a problem with many citizens calling police for what might be suspicious to them. It involves a person of color just in the neighborhood or parked outside their house. In the past, police, you have to respond to calls. But every interaction then might lead to something else. They might have a warrant for them, they might be on bond, or just the interaction becomes unpleasant, what have you. So the city police now have changed the policy that if they get a call where somebody just says there's a suspicious man, outside my residence or on the street or walking on the street, what have you, they won't just go to the scene. They will try to get some information first and ask the caller what's suspicious about them. And if all they can say is they're just walking down the street, the police won't even go to the call. If they can't articulate something other than just that vague feeling, they won't go to the call, or at most they'll drive in the area and just watch from a distance, but they won't just approach people anymore and say, we got a call for someone being suspicious. So I think, kudos to the city for, again, making a specific change that hopefully will have some impact on some of those cases where people before, felt like the cops would be calling me just for walking down the street. It did happen. It still does happen. But that's one thing the city police are doing to the positive.
Thank you. That's really good to know. Okay, one last question. How would you assess the resources our county has for addressing mental health needs for people who engage in the criminal justice system? Are we moving in the right direction to be able to address those needs? And what are the primary obstacles to meeting those needs? Another long question.
Obviously resources are a significant obstacle. I've been overseeing the drug court now for the last 5 or 6 years. I know that our results recently have been better. And I think in part that's because of resources that are developed or devoted for treatment, specifically residential programming. And since the opioid grants have been extended, we've been much more successful in directing people who have that, who meet the criteria into residential programming. I think the vast majority of our participants suffer from AODA needs, addiction, but also co-occurring mental health disorders. And with the greater ability to get people into residential programming, we've had much better results. So I think the availability of resources has been a huge benefit to us. The greatest challenge, obviously, is expanding the array of resources. And I think specifically with respect to mental health. And there's oftentimes an overlap between Chapter 51 cases or individuals who go into the civil mental health arena versus the criminal arena. I think many times the criminal arena has been the place that people with mental health needs are funneled. And I think we probably need to do a better job of identifying people who have mental health needs and can be addressed independently of the criminal justice system. Obviously, there are some cases in which the harm is great enough that you need to involve the criminal justice system. On the other hand, there are many others with chronic mental health needs who commit low-level crimes who would benefit from a more robust mental health access.
Well, thank you very much. Robin, thank you to all the panelists. This is very interesting.
Yeah, I guess I'm just overwhelmed by your expertise and your commitment to the criminal justice system. And I'm so grateful that you're able to join us today and share with us your perspective. And again, I know you're very busy, all of you, and I just want to extend my personal thanks and also thanks from the League because this information is just so valuable for us and moving forward for a better community and a better system for all of us. So thank you very much. I want to give just a quick shout out for our next Lunch and Learn, which will be October 12th from 1:30 to from 11:30 to 1. And that is going to focus on local policing. So we'll have an ability to continue along this type of dialogue for, how to make our communities better for all. I think that concludes our first Lunch and Learn for the fall season. And I hope you all continue to be well, stay well, and thank you so much for joining us.